After 4 years of promises that never came true, my parents pulled the rug out from under me, refusing to pay for my college tuition. Why? Because my younger brother didn't get into his dream school. Let me explain. I'm 20, and I've always had a younger brother, Jared. Even though he's just 10 months younger than me, our parents always treated him like he was the golden child, and that made everything between us feel like a competition. We were always in the same grade, always against each other. And from day one, I won. Academically, I always outshone him. From the first test to the last, I was the one with the grades that made my parents proud. I had my heart set on Caltech, dreaming of studying data science. Meanwhile, Jared was more interested in biology, claiming he was going to revolutionize microbiology and become a pioneer in the field. But let's be real, he was more talk than action, always boasting but never delivering. He wasn't lazy, but he just didn't have the drive. On the other hand, I worked hard for everything I had. As my high school years went by, I got this good feeling that I'd make it into Caltech. By my junior year, I was performing well, and the possibility of acceptance felt real. So, I did what any hopeful student would do. I sat down with my parents and had a serious talk. I wanted assurances that they would cover the costs of my education. And they promised me they would. They assured me it would be easy, that it wouldn't be a problem at all. My dad had inherited a successful business and, despite their humble beginnings, they were comfortably well off. But I was still worried. My dad had to work his way through college, even though he came from money, and I feared they might try to do the same with me. But they kept telling me, over and over, not to worry, that when the time came, they'd make sure I could go to Caltech without the burden of tuition. They promised it, year after year. Even as my senior year of high school began, when everyone was applying to colleges, I was still under the impression that everything was set. I had been accepted into Caltech. That was my dream. And my parents, as they promised, would take care of the rest. Then, the moment arrived. I opened the letter from Caltech. I was in. But when I shared the news, everything flipped. My parents told me they wouldn't pay for it. The reason? Jared had been rejected from his dream school, Cornell. He was devastated, and they didn't want him to feel like a failure. So, their solution? I should attend a mediocre college with him, so he wouldn't feel bad about himself. It was absurd. Jared had always aimed high, but let's be honest, his grades were nowhere near what Cornell demanded. He was an average student, nothing wrong with that, but expecting to get into a top-tier school like that was setting himself up for failure. And that's exactly what happened. When my parents told me this, that I should give up my dream for his, I didn't need a second to think. No way! I had earned my spot, worked my ass off, and now they wanted me to throw it all away for him? My sympathy for Jared, though real, wasn't enough for me to sacrifice my future. I could have been understanding if he had ever been kind to me, but we had never really gotten along. Our parents had always pitted us against each other, and no matter how hard I tried, Jared thought he was superior to me. Where that belief came from, I still don't know. But my parents reinforced it by constantly treating him like he was the better of us. And that, of course, drove me mad. As a kid, I fought with them about it constantly, but it never worked. They told me I was the older one, so I should just accept things as they were. I vented to my maternal uncle about this, but what good did it do? So when my parents asked me to make that sacrifice, I refused. They turned cold, telling me that if I didn't put Jared first, they wouldn't pay for my college tuition. My blood boiled. I had been promised something for 4 years, and now, just like that, they were ready to rip it away. I had worked hard, trusted them, and now they were saying it was all for nothing. I hadn't even looked into student loans, hadn't taken up jobs or internships. They led me to believe everything would be fine, and now it wasn't. The fight that followed was brutal. They were firm in their stance, either I sacrificed my dream or they would not help me. And their reason? To make sure Jared didn't feel like a failure. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just a small sacrifice they were asking for, they were asking me to throw away my future. And I wouldn't do that. After all that pleading, all that fighting, it was clear that they weren't going to change their minds. I was done. I grabbed my things, packed a bag, and left. They didn't try to stop me. That night, I went to my uncle's house. He was always there for me, always understood me, even when my parents couldn't. I told him everything, laid it all out. I was at my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed help. I begged him to co-sign my loan. That was all I needed, just a little help, and then I would figure out how to pay it off. I was a mess when I arrived, but my uncle calmed me down. He listened, took it all in. And then he told me something that would change everything. He said, "I'll take care of your tuition. You don't need to worry about a thing." I couldn't believe it. The weight lifted from my chest. No student loans, no debt, no worries. I could go to Caltech like I always dreamed. My uncle, a successful dentist, could have saved that money for his future, but he chose to invest in mine. And I will forever be grateful to him for that. 1 year into college, and I can honestly say it's been one of the best years of my life. I don't know where I'd be without my uncle's kindness. For the past year, I hadn't heard a single word from my parents. No calls, no texts. It was as if they had decided I was out of their lives. I figured they knew everything about me, though. After all, I was active on social media, posting updates of my life, my college journey. They couldn't be entirely in the dark. Even though I had blocked them, I still had some family members who stayed in contact with me, and from what I gathered, my parents were keeping in touch with the rest of the family, except for my uncle. He had cut them off the moment he discovered what they'd done to me. So, when I heard nothing from them for months, I honestly wasn't expecting anything. But last week, something completely unexpected happened. They showed up at my college, out of the blue, unannounced. I was in shock. My first instinct? To avoid them. But then, curiosity got the best of me. What was this all about? So, I agreed to meet them. We went out for lunch. It felt surreal. The air between us was thick with years of unresolved tension, yet they sat there, telling me how sorry they were for everything. They said they wanted to make things right. It sounded rehearsed, too clean, but I was willing to give them a chance. There was one thing, though, they hadn't brought Jared along, my brother. Naturally, I asked about him. They told me he decided to take a gap year, focus on applying to colleges again. But then, they started talking badly about him. They said they were disappointed in him, that he was the real failure. They went on about how this was another reason they wanted to make it up to me. It felt off. Everything felt off. But I let it go, or so I tried. Then, toward the end of our lunch, they dropped the bombshell. They admitted they hadn't come just to apologize. There was another reason. They were in the middle of negotiations with a major investor, someone crucial for their catering business. They were trying to break into the high-end market, catering to upper-class events. And they needed me. Desperately. They explained that a few days before our lunch, the investor had mentioned that his son was trying to get into Caltech. When my parents bragged about me attending, the investor wanted me there at a work party to meet his son, offer some guidance, maybe even give him some tips on getting into the college. The catch? My parents were trying to use me to get on this investor's good side. They wanted me to attend the party, to speak highly of them, make them look good. All this so they could close the deal. And in return, they offered me a deal that was hard to ignore. They knew I'd been talking to my uncle, asking for his help with college expenses. They knew they'd let me down. So, they promised me something huge, covering all of my tuition and expenses, plus doubling what I needed if I just helped them out. All I had to do was lie about how wonderful they were at the party. Speak well of them to this investor. Honestly, at first, it didn't seem like a bad deal. So, I agreed, but I had my own plans. I had every intention of flipping the script on them. 3 days ago, the party came and I showed up with them. The whole time, I was playing along, promising them I'd do what they wanted. But when it was time to meet the investor, I let them have it. I couldn't help myself. I told him everything about how they hadn't spoken to me for a year and how they had only come to me now because they wanted something. I told him they had promised me for 4 years they'd cover my college, and when it came time to deliver, they backed out. Why? Because of Jared. They wanted me to give up on my dreams so it wouldn't hurt him. And when I didn't, they cut me off. When I finished, the look on the investor's face was priceless. He was stunned. The room was silent. But the best part? My parents. They were sitting there, red-faced, not able to look anyone in the eye. It felt like justice, but I wasn't done yet. I didn't stick around long. I called a cab and headed back to campus, just a 45-minute ride away. Since that night, it's been total chaos. My parents have been flooding my social media with new accounts, calling me from different phone numbers, sending me endless emails, all because I blocked them. They're furious, blaming me for ruining their deal. The investor stopped responding after what I said. But here's the thing, I don't even care about that. What's bothering me now is my uncle. I told him everything about what happened. I thought he'd laugh. Finally, I had gotten back at my parents for what they had done to me. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he told me that what I did was cruel, vindictive. He said I should have just told my parents I wasn't interested in helping them and left it at that. But no, I went too far. And now, every conversation since then has been cold, distant. I feel guilty. So, here I am, wondering, am I wrong for what I did? Update, it's been a week since the party, and I've been reading all the comments, trying to decide if I was right or wrong. Some people say I did the right thing, others think I went too far. It's been nothing but confusion, but eventually, I decided to follow my heart. I called my uncle, asking if I could visit him. I didn't want to discuss this over the phone, it needed to be face-to-face. So, I went to his house yesterday. The tension in the air was thick. We hadn't really spoken since the party, and things were awkward. But I broke the silence and told him that I didn't think I should feel guilty or apologize to my parents. However, since his opinion mattered to me, I wanted to explain why I did what I did. I opened up. I told him how my parents had promised to help me for 4 years, only to turn their backs on me at the last minute, all to protect my brother's feelings. And that was what really hurt me. I had always known the impact of my actions, but something deep inside urged me to confront him, to share my pain from an emotional perspective. I needed him to truly understand just how deeply hurt I was. I told him, with raw honesty, that I had always felt like an afterthought, like nothing I did was ever enough to earn the recognition I desperately sought. Despite my best efforts to make my parents proud, it always felt like I was invisible, overlooked. And the resentment I had built up over the years? It was overwhelming, like an unspoken weight I had carried alone. And then, on the day of the party, something inside of me snapped. I decided it was time to make them see the damage they had caused, to make sure they knew how their actions had twisted me into someone I never wanted to be. I was done being the victim. I was done letting them dictate my life. When my uncle heard me out, he remained silent for a long moment, almost as if processing what I had said. Then, finally, he spoke, but his words stung like ice. "If you truly think what you did was right," he said coldly, "then I have nothing left to say to you." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I was blindsided. I had hoped that opening up about my feelings would somehow lead to him seeing things from my perspective, that he would understand my actions came from a place of anger, that maybe it wasn't the wisest choice, but that it had given me a sense of relief. But instead, he dismissed me as if I had done something unforgivable. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't perfect. I wasn't always going to make the right choices, but sometimes people have to do things to protect themselves from being walked all over. And then, the audacity of it all, the deal they had expected me to accept. They wanted me to play along, to pretend that everything was fine for the sake of money. It was a slap in the face, an insult to my very being. So, I made it clear to my uncle, if that's the way he wanted to see me, then I wouldn't be taking any help from him either. It felt reckless, bold, and terrifying all at once. I had no backup plan, no idea what would happen next, but I couldn't take another step backward. But strangely, after hearing that, my uncle's stern expression softened just a fraction. He told me it wasn't necessary for me to be so angry, that he was only upset because I had chosen revenge over letting it go. He explained, calmly and with surprising patience, that revenge wasn't the way to move forward in life. I paused, considering his words. I knew he was right. Deep down, I knew it wasn't the healthiest response, but in that moment, it had felt necessary. I assured him, though, that now that it was done, there was no turning back. In the end, we never really agreed on whether my actions were justified, but at least we cleared the air. By the time I left, we were cracking jokes, easing the tension in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, things seemed okay. But even though the conversation with my uncle had somewhat resolved things, the real battle was still looming. My parents, desperate to fix the situation on their terms, had been blowing up my phone, and I just couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't know what else to do. All I could do was keep ignoring them, hoping they would eventually see that constant texting wasn't going to fix anything. A few days passed. Then, just as I thought the storm had passed, they showed up unannounced. At my college. My parents, unwilling to give up, showed up at the front desk demanding I come down to see them. The receptionist, bless her, tried to reason with them, but they refused to leave without seeing me. I was cornered. I had no choice but to meet them face to face. My heart was racing. The thought of them embarrassing me on campus made my stomach twist into knots. To avoid that, I suggested we meet at a nearby diner instead. But what really made my blood run cold was the sight of Jared. The same Jared I had grown up with, only now, he had transformed. He was different. Stronger. Bigger. His muscles rippling as he flexed them with calculated arrogance. He shot me looks that sent a chill down my spine. Was he trying to intimidate me? Of course he was. And I wasn't sure whether I should laugh or be terrified. The tension in the air was thick, and my mind raced with the unsettling thought that he might just follow through on his threats. But I was determined to stand my ground. When we sat down, they wasted no time. My parents, in their usual manner, tried to guilt me into backing down, claiming that my words at the party were unnecessary. They insisted I take to social media to apologize, to retract everything I'd said, and to clean up their mess. The one thing they never understood, though, was that their reputation didn't matter to me. I wasn't about to let them twist the truth just to save face. And when they offered me money, again, to do what they asked, it was as if they thought they could buy me. Buy my silence. But I wasn't for sale. That's when it all exploded. As I stood up to leave, my dad slammed his fist on the table so hard that the whole diner went quiet. His anger was palpable, but so was the shock of those around us. I looked to the diner owner, someone I knew well, and he gave me a nod, a silent assurance that he was watching. But as my dad raged, something inside me snapped. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't care if Jared was flexing his muscles or if my dad was pounding his fists. They had no control over me anymore. And I let them know it. In the chaos that followed, my mother tried her usual manipulation, pulling out the old "we raised you, and this is how you repay us" card. But I was done with it. I didn't let her finish before I cut her off. I reminded them, coldly, that they had done the bare minimum for me and that I had raised myself in many ways. They had always treated Jared like he was the golden child, but I had never asked for that kind of favoritism. I had only hoped that, at the very least, they would stand up for me when it mattered most. But they didn't. And when it came time to make good on their promises, they let me down. I had nothing left to give them. I was done. And that was it. I stood up, told them I was leaving, and made it clear if they ever tried any of this nonsense again, I would take legal action. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to be silenced. And I didn't look back as I walked out of that diner.